Hey guys, today we're going to learn about experimental and theoretical probability and the differences between the two. So experimental probability is found by doing an experiment multiple times and observing the outcomes. In order to calculate the experimental probability, we're going to do the number of times an event occurs over the total number of trials. Or how many times we did an experiment. So in this case, we flipped the coin 10 times. So this number right here, this piece of information, is our total trials. That's how many times we performed this experiment. During the experiment, heads came up 7 times and tails came up 3 times. So this right here, heads coming up 7 and tails coming up 3, these are both different outcomes or the number of times events occurred. So to find the experimental probability of getting a heads, we're going to do 7, because heads came up 7 times, over 10, because we flipped the coin 10 times. Now with probability, we often like to convert this into decimals and percentages, so we're going to review how to do that right now. And in order to do this, in order to get a decimal, I should say, from a fraction, we do top number divided by bottom number, or numerator divided by the denominator. So in this case, we are going to do 7 divided by 10 to get 0.7. Now from here, in order to get a percent, we're going to take our decimal that we just got and times it by 100. So we're going to take 0.7 times 100, and we get 70%. So right here is our answer to what is the experimental probability of getting a heads. When looking at tails, I'm just going to cut this right in half. We're going to take the number of times tails came up, which was that 3, and we're going to put that over the total trials, which is 10. And we are then going to take our top number divided by our bottom number to get our decimal of 0.3, or 0.3, you could write it as. And then we're going to take our decimal of 0.3, or 0.3. We're going to times it by 100 to get our percentage of 30%. So that is our answer for tails. Now, the other type of probability that we're going to learn about today is theoretical probability. Theoretical probability is what is expected to happen based on mathematics. And what this means is if we performed that experiment of flipping our coin, let's say instead of 10 times, if we performed it 1,000,000 times, most likely the theoretical probability will occur in our experiment. So to find theoretical probability, we're going to do our favorable outcomes, basically what we want to happen, over all possible outcomes. So the example, we're still going to keep with flipping a coin, because we know that 7 out of 10 times getting a heads isn't actually that probable, even though it looked probable in that experiment. So when we're flipping a coin, we have two sides. We have a head side and a tail side. So for possible outcomes, we have two. There's two possible outcomes. Heads or tails. Now, if we're finding the probability of getting a heads, we have one favorable outcome. Unless you have one of those coins that have heads on both sides. But in this case, we have one because there is heads. So to find the probability of getting a heads, we are going to do 1 over 2, which I think a lot of you don't need to go through the steps of this, and we get 0.5 or 50%. A lot of you know that half marker. Same thing with tails. If we look at the favorable outcome for tails, there's 1 out of 2. So we're going to do 1 out of 2, and that again is 0.5 and is 50%. Now, the question is, can you tell the difference between experimental or theoretical? So pause the video real quick, read through these two questions, and in your head think which one is the experimental probability and which one is the theoretical probability. All right, let's see if you were right. So this first one, it says you roll a die 12 times. You roll a 4 3 times. What is the probability of rolling a 4? This one is experimental because we performed an experiment. We actually rolled a 4 3 times. Now, if we're rolling a 4 3 times, this is the number of times the event occurred. We rolled it 12 total times, so this is the total trials. So to find this experimental probability, we are going to take 3 and put it over 12. And then over here, I'm going to do some work. I'm going to do 3 divided by 12 to get my decimal. And then I'm going to do a little more work over here and do 0.25 times 100 to get 25%. And there is our answer. Now for this second question, I hope you put theoretical because there was no actual doing anything. So this is theoretical probability. And a bag has 7 marbles in it, 2 red, 1 blue, 3 green, and 1 purple. What is the probability of pulling out a green marble? So we're finding green marble, so I'm going to underline 3 green because that's important information. And we also want to, I always like to circle the total. So this is possible outcomes. And 3 green, because we're finding the probability of green, is our favorable outcomes. So when finding the probability for this problem, we're going to do 3 over 7, favorable over possible. I'm going to do some work over here and do 3 divided by 7. And we get approximately 0.4286. Now I'm saying approximate, that means I did round this number. And then in order to turn this into a percent, we are going to times by 100. So 0.4286 times 100 is equal to 42.86 So we have about a 43% chance of getting a green marble from that bag. All right, so today's practice problems are having you determine if something is theoretical or experimental, and then actually having you calculate the two different probabilities. Make sure that you're using your formulas. So theoretical probability again, favorable outcomes over all possible outcomes. And experimental probability, the number of times the event occurs over the total number of trials.